Hi, friends. This is John. Welcome back to the Regenerative Agriculture Podcast, where we have all kinds of fun conversations related to producing healthy soil, healthy feed, healthy livestock, and ultimately healthy people, which is the foundational purpose and reason of agriculture. If we miss that objective, then what are we here for exactly? So, this conversation today is one that I've been looking forward to for some time. I met Jim Elizondo a long time ago. He just told me 11 years ago. And one of the things that I was intrigued with, Jim, years ago, we had a conversation around the untapped yield potential of forages and some of the work that CJ Fenzow was doing. Um, I dropped the ball, and we never followed up on making some of those experiments happen. But I've always been intrigued. You are in a slightly different ecosystem and climate from many of the popular grazing gurus. You've become a little bit of a grazing guru of your own. You've had a lot of impact on the way many people approach grazing management, and you've developed your very, perhaps a very original perspective on how you approach grazing management. Tell us a little bit about that, about your journey, and how your perspective is different from perhaps the mainstream view. If the contemporary or the not necessarily the mainstream view, but the fringe mainstream view. How about that?
Yes. Well, let's start with conventional grazing management, which was in 1953, mostly continuous grazing, and that's when Kreider made his famous experiment of the take half, leave half, where he cut with scissors potted plants, young seedlings, up to every other day, and then every 2 weeks, and so on. And he found that overgrazing or cutting too often a young plant will stop the root from growing. From there, somehow, those grazing gurus that you mentioned got the idea that whenever we graze now with rotational grazing or non-selective grazing, we should take no more than half of the plant. And that's a very bad conclusion from an experiment not done for that.
Right.
So since then, a lot of people have been behind the black eight ball by trying to focus on taking half when livestock do not graze like a mower, but take down to the ground the preferred species and leave behind the ones that they don't like. And that has created most of the problems that we have today.
So let me just clarify. When you say what has created most of the problems we have today is giving them the are you referring to giving them the opportunity for selective grazing
Yes.
or okay.
Yes, because when they try to make livestock graze like a mower up
Yep.
to 4, 5, 6 inches, whatever flavor of the month rotational grazing system they come up with, they will always create selective grazing, which always converts into overgrazing, which is the main cause of long-lived soil carbon being lost to the atmosphere. That's the truth.
So what is the solution? What's your solution to graze it hard, not give them the opportunity to take half and leave half?
Okay, that's a good point, and it needs to be clarified.
Yep.
Total grazing, which is what I teach, is taking down the grass plant to 1 to 2 inches from the soil surface, but well recovered grass plants, not young plants, which would be overgrazing. Overgrazing is when we regraze a plant while it is too young, and that's what shortens roots. That's what Ryder demonstrated, and that's what creates a hard pan 4 inches deep, where the
Yep.
roots uh, hard pan is always created by a lack of strong roots.
All right. Now, Jim, I had no idea of the conversation we were going to get in, but this is this is so intriguing because over the last couple of years, grazers have been reaching out to me with this exact problem. They're being instructed to take half leave. Well, they're getting instruction from many leaders in the grazing space, and they for many years they've been trying to do the right thing, and yet their soils become more compacted over time. They're no longer building soil carbon. They're no longer building organic matter. And there's a variety of contributing factors. I've also come to the conclusion that a part of it is that they have their grazing patterns favor grass dominance, and they lose out on their forb populations because they're not stressing the grass root systems enough by simply grazing half and taking half. But you mentioned, I want you to elaborate. You said this creates a hard pan. Let's just expand a little bit. How is a hard pan created when you're grazing?
When overgrazing, you create short roots, the hard pan develops because strong roots is the way to avoid a hard pan from reforming after it gets wet.
Yeah.
That's it.
So overgrazing, the way that you're describing it, in essence, is grazing a plant before it's matured or when it's still
No,
immature.
no, I didn't say mature. Before it's well recovered in its energy reserves, which are in roots and crowns. You see, there are two theories of what makes a plant regrow after grazing. One is the one that I follow and nature follows. The regrowth is fueled by energy reserves in roots and crowns. That's it. The other theory, which is wrong, says that regrowth is fueled by green leaves left behind. But that would be true if livestock graze like a mower. But because livestock do not graze that way, they take all the green material and leave, which creates energy by photosynthesis, and leave behind the stems that consume energy by respiring. So
Yep.
that gives us a much lower energy plant for growth, for livestock, and for improving the soil with the root exudates.
Yep. All right. So, what is the distinction between a plant that is fully recovered and a plant that is mature?
Yeah. There is a, have you heard about André Bazin, grass productivity
Yeah.
back in 1950 some?
He's three or four incredible books with his name on them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the one I'm referring to is called grass productivity.
Yeah.
In it, he says that there is a best stage. I don't know how to say it in English. Punto óptimo de reposo means the optimal point of recovery for a grass to be grazed. And that's when the basal leaves start to turn yellow. The tiny leaves that were created first start to turn yellow due to the shade of the taller green leaves shading the sunlight from the lower basal leaves. That's when little energy is being accumulated due to a more larger canopy of green leaves, not to confuse with yellow basal leaves in the dry season. That's different. So that would be when the plant has recovered enough. But then we need to consider the livestock, which are ruminants and require a minimum amount of fiber so as not to go scours. So in cool season grasses, which are low in fiber and high in sugars, their energy is in the form of sugars. We need to wait a little longer so the grass plant has enough fiber so the cow or ewe can chew their cud and not scour. Because we need in our livestock first health, then maximum performance, and then best conversion efficiency. Just as you do in soil, the rumen works mostly the same.
Many grazers have they listen to Ian Mitchell Innes and Alan Williams. I could name a long list of the heroes in the space, the innovators, the pioneers who've done incredible work. And then grazers need to take that information home and adapt it to their situation, figure out how it fits in their context. And one of the things that I've come to realize is perhaps one of the things that's missing is not having a good enough understanding of the foundational principles of why we are doing things a certain way. And so the point that you made earlier about sugar reserves in the root system, I think, is something that is not well understood generally. We don't tend to think, we're not taught to think about how sugar flows and how sugar moves in a plant.
Yeah,
Um,
but wait. I didn't say sugar. I said energy. Okay, let's not confuse terms because later I'm going to explain how fatty root exudates are so important.
all right, good. So, boy, now I want to ask that question, but I'll finish my thought and then we'll come back to that.
Okay.
So my thought or my question is, the approach that you are describing, where are the growers? Are there growers in different geographic areas or different climates who have needed to adapt your approach to their climate? And what does that look like?
Yes, yes. I just returned from New Zealand and Australia, where I went to teach this at the Total Grazing Academy. And in October, I was in Spain and in Italy, and I have students all over the world proving this works everywhere that green grass grows, because the rumen is a rumen here and in Iceland, and overgrazing grass works the same here and in the tropics or in Canada. I was in Canada in November last year uh, teaching at the Manitoba Grassland Conference. Before that, in September in Alberta. So I have students with success in those environments, the same as in South Africa, the same as in South America. It works the same. We need to remember that soil life is the determinant of grass productivity. And the most important determinant of soil fertility is soil long lived carbon. So we need to increase that. And we can do that now that we know how it's created. And it's not in the green season grazing area.
How,
Mhm.
how is it created? How do we create long-term soil
Okay.
carbon?
Okay. Well, you know all this, but let's talk to the audience.
Yeah.
Mineral association organic matter or particulate organic matter. One is long-lived soil carbon, the other one is short-lived soil carbon. Both are important, but the one that we have been mining off soils and we need to replenish because it's our savings account is the long-lived soil carbon. So, what I have found after years of observing and trialing in different environments around the world is that by stockpiling pastures for over 6 months, we create standing hay to use for our livestock in the difficult seasons of the year, and we increase sponginess of the soil because the fungi to bacteria ratio improves. We get more fungi. And then I started measuring organic carbon, and it went up faster than with any other method. And did you know that soil grows upwards instead of downwards?
Yes. And
Okay.
how much can it grow upwards? I've seen some remarkable numbers.
An inch a year?
An inch a year.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You look at the pyramids in Mexico, how they
Yep.
were covered with soil after 500 years of
Mhm.
nothing. And or look at the uh, a lawn near a house, how then later on you need to take off some soil because it's coming higher than the house.
Yep.
And in my backyard, I've seen that. Or on the highway, or the disappearing boulders in Ireland, where a picture taken 50 years ago showed the boulders and now they're covered with soil. 50 years. So it depends on how you manage and how good the environment is for holding that long-lived soil carbon, because as any carbon is cycles, and the higher the temperatures, the more difficult it is to increase it. But in Florida, we have gone from 1% organic matter in sandy soil to 3.18% in 5 years. That's,
Wow.
that's 15 tons of carbon per acre per year.
Yep.
That's a lot. So it can be done.
That is a lot. And so when you describe mineral associated organic matter versus particulate organic matter,
Mhm.
How for the mineral associated organic matter, the long-lived soil carbon, how do you build that most effectively with grazing management?
The truth is that by minimizing overgrazing in the green season, by using the program that I have, the Total Grazing program, you increase grass production by 3 to 5 times compared to continuous grazing. That allows you to stockpile a section of your farm to grow standing hay, to recruit seedlings of your best forage species, which would be impossible under selective grazing. Rotational selective grazing, you kill them when they are trying to germinate by returning livestock. Plus, you save money on hay. Plus, you start creating long-lived soil carbon because the root exudates of in the green season, when you're grazing the plant, the energy reserves go up and down. Every time you graze it, the plant consumes energy reserves in roots and ground, and they are replenished, and then you graze it again. By doing that, you minimize overgrazing by waiting enough time, recovery time, which is very different to rest time. Rest is different. Okay. And then when you do not graze a paddock for at least 6 months of the year, a long time, the root exudates change from sugary to fatty. And that's when the energy in the root exudates gets higher in complex substance organic acids, organic fatty acids, and amino acids, which fungi can digest better than bacteria. And that's how we feed more fungi, which are super crucial to create long-lived soil carbon. And I have all the links to the scientific literature, and I am releasing a paper on that.
Awesome. So, to summarize what you just said, if you allow plants to fully recover, as they recover and they are no longer in the actively growing vegetative stage, their root exudate profile changes. They have a lot more fatty acids, and that's how you build mineral associated organic matter. Did I get that right?
Yes, but let me explain a little more. And this is going to sound crazy, but I have the pictures and I have the scientific data.
If if we didn't have good crazy stories that stretch the boundaries, what would be the reason of having a conversation?
Okay, have you heard about happy plants?
No.
Okay, it's a term I started describing grass plants that keep growing after maturity without sending a seed head and increasing the size of their leaves by 3 to 5 times.
Okay, come again. I thought when the seed head was mature, that was the end of growth.
No,
Okay.
no. I have a lot of pictures in September in Alberta, Canada. Orchard grass, cut food for people in UK. Uh, it goes mature and then it keeps growing in the fall. Why? Because it's a perennial. So yeah, it went mature. It unlike perennial ryegrass, which really stops and falls down because it's been selected for lower and lower fiber and higher sugar. That's a mistake. Orchard grass grows, sets seed, turn brown, and then regrows green leaves. Okay. By then, the root exudates. The roots and energy reserves are full, and when that new energy comes from the new green leaves, there is an excess of energy in the roots and it starts to exude as fatty root exudates. And that's when we get do you know the priming effect?
Yes. But
Okay.
explain the priming
The
effect.
priming effect is what makes particulate organic matter. And we lose the carbon to the atmosphere. And that's what creates fertility or a fertilizer effect, short-lived soil carbon. The more sugary the root exudates, the higher the priming effect. The higher in amino acids and organic fatty acids the root exudates, the smaller the priming effect. So more of that carbon is turned into particulate organic matter carbon. And that's how we increase the long-lived soil carbon in our soils. And then after cycles of this, let's see, because we alternate these stockpile paddocks every year through the property to improve the whole property, which I consider as an organism uh, communicated together by mycorrhiza. Then we start to get happy plants. And that's when things start to improve faster.
So, happy plants are plants that continue growing vegetatively after they have set seed.
No, they don't
No.
even send a seed head. They don't send a seed head because they have reached energy homeostasis or balance or equilibrium, and the plant does not sense the need to go to seed, the perennial plant. And then they keep growing in leaves without sending a seed head. Most people have never seen this in their lives.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to keep exploring here because I want to
Mhm.
talk about this a bit more. So,
Yeah.
you used an orchard grass example just a moment ago
Yeah.
of an orchard grass that matures and then continues vegetative growth. And I assumed when you said matures that it, or maybe you said it, that it sends out a seed head. But you're
It-
actually saying that that doesn't necessarily need to be the case.
exactly. I have more experience with Bahia grass, Pensacola Bahia grass in Florida, which is usually produces seed 3 to 4 times a year. Every time it senses the need to reproduce, it sends a seed head. And that's why people don't like that grass. And they recommend to use better species with synthetic nitrogen. Okay. But when you manage Bahia grass or even Phalaris grass correctly, uh, in Australia, we call Phalaris grass the Perth man hotfoot or orchard grass because you create much larger leaves by grazing management. Okay, but let me go back. The Bahia grass that I have most experience with, it starts to produce larger leaves, up to 5 times larger. And
Larger
because
as in wider,
wider
longer?
and longer, bigger, 5 times larger, not only long, but wide. And a leafy pasture has more energy than a stemmy pasture.
Yep.
So that improves the soil humus or long-lived soil carbon faster. And we start to get happy plants that do not go to seed. They do not sense the need to go to seed. And we get strong and deep roots. And that's our main focus to improve the soil with our grazing management.
So what you're saying in essence is that reproduction in perennial grasses is a response to stress or a response to low energy reserves.
Both, both. You see, when you have a very high humus content, and long-lived soil carbon or humus feeds plants on demand, and because the microbes which bodies were converted into long-lived soil carbon had all the different nutrients required by the plant, they will be fed on demand by amino acids, as you explained, and fatty organic acids. And then the plant will be more waxy, more high in fat. And then the livestock do better, but the soil improves faster. Okay, so those plants that have reached that stage of homeostasis between the soil and the energy they are returning to the soil did not go to seed,
All
or
right.
very little. In drier environments, you see like 10% seed heads instead of 100%. In more humid environments, 0%
Yeah.
of seed heads.
All right. So let's review the steps
I see
for
you smiling a lot.
what's that?
I see you smiling a lot when I
Oh
say
yeah, I'm smiling a lot. I'm smiling a lot about what you're describing because this you're describing some new concepts that I haven't heard of before, and I enjoy learning. And one of the challenges of reading a lot is that I often hear repetitions of the same thing or read repetitions of the same thing stated in different ways, and that can be insightful as well. But it's a lot of fun to hear new ideas. And so yeah, I'm finding this conversation very enjoyable. Plus all the things you're talking about. Uh, fats as root exudates and waxy leaves and amino acid nutrition. Like, these are things I've been talking about for years, but I sometimes feel people haven't understood them particularly well.
Oh, we're talking the same language.
Yeah, we're talking about exactly the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been talking about fatty acids as root exudates and the power that has in fungal digestion and the humification process for decades. And not a lot of people, it's a lot harder to achieve that in an annual cropping system than it is with perennials.
It is more difficult, but I think you're leading the way in that. The
Yep.
first person that talked to me about fatty root exudates, you know who was it?
No,
It was you.
it was me.
In 2014 in the Iowa Practical Farmers Conference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Things come full circle a
Yeah.
decade later. Yeah, that's fun. So I want to I know the answer, but for our listeners, I think it bears repeating again. How do you produce happy plants?
Okay. By stockpiling a section of the farm that is alternated every year. Once you have 2 or 3 cycles in good rainfall environment, you get happy plants if you do not use any chemicals in the soil. I did use some fodder fertilizer at first and mycorrhiza at first because the sandy soil had no mycorrhiza
Yeah, you needed
years
that trigger.
from years of excess glyphosate applied because it was a tree nursery. They applied glyphosate twice a month for 20 some years.
Wow.
So it was white sand with no soil life. And I saw that the voles, when they did their burrows, the grass grew 5 times larger there. So I researched, and that was from mycorrhiza. So I started overseeding with mycorrhizal inoculated seed, and that changed everything. I could see the grain spreading through the farm.
Yeah.
Have,
Yes.
have you seen those pastures that are yellow and have bright green spots that people say those are manure spots?
Yes.
That's
Except
manure.
I've never seen a manure spot 4 feet across like some of them are.
Exactly. And then it starts to spread. So those are mycorrhizal hotspots.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I demonstrated that in New Zealand to people. Yeah. Very interesting.
So this is a fascinating conversation that I'm enjoying a lot. But I'm going to go back because I have a feeling we haven't. There's many things we haven't uncovered yet. I started this conversation by asking you the question: what are your original insights? What are your perspectives that are different from many others? And we've talked about kind of, well, there's a combination of several that are all wrapped up in this larger theme. But what else? What else have you developed that is a different perspective that people aren't thinking about?
Okay. Adapted genetics and selection guidelines. We need livestock that can not only be efficient converters of tons of grass to make saleable products, but can also improve the land on which they graze. Uh, Johann Sitzmann taught me that back in the day, a long time ago, and that's so true. We need to think of the ecosystem function of our livestock as a proxy for the large herds of megafauna that were killed off 50,000 years ago, and which role was to improve the land on which they grazed. Half of them, by weight, were hindgut fermenters, and half of them were ruminants. This is what's lacking in all those gurus that you mentioned and many more, because they only went to what they were observing when they were younger. And that was a totally degraded ecosystem, especially in the United States when white men came to colonize. They thought that was a pristine environment, and it wasn't. It was already degraded. So we need to go back in time and by fossilized pollen and fossilized fungi, spores that were in the manure of those ruminants, and hindgut fermenters. Now we have a better idea of what really happened and why the weather or the climate changed because of the extinction of these animals, and why wildfire grassland burns were more frequent after they were killed off. So this changes the whole paradigm. And the grazing paradigm needs to change because selective grazing is exactly what we shouldn't do. It goes against basic plant physiology, goes against how this was designed by God from the first, and we need to go back in time. We can be better.
All right. You're bringing something to me again that is new. So, the I've spent a lot of time thinking about, in the case of North America, what the North American continent looked like 400 years ago, 500 years ago.
Mm.
Um, and with the mental image that that was an optimal ecosystem, a managed ecosystem, of course, by the Native Americans, but an optimal ecosystem. But you're describing that that was not the case. But
No.
I haven't done the research and the homework to know what that would have looked like thousands of years earlier. So, can you build a bit of a mental image? You mentioned, yeah, tell us a little bit about what
Yeah.
that might have looked like.
Let's go back 80,000 years or 150,000 years ago. Okay? Uh, Modern man were not there yet, and the megafauna consisted of half of the herbivores being hindgut fermenters, which means that they can graze lower protein, higher fiber grasses, thrive in it.
What are examples of hindgut fermenters?
Horses,
Yep.
zebra, uh, mammoths, mastodons,
Yep.
elephants, uh, ground sloths, all of those are hindgut fermenters. Kangaroos,
Hmm.
so they can thrive on lower protein, higher fiber forages, while ruminants cannot, because the rumen microbes need a minimum of protein to be able to feed the cow or the ewe. Okay, so when men came in and killed them, the larger ones first off because they were easier to kill per calorie expended. They got more kilograms of meat. Okay, so they went after them first because they were slower moving also. And you can see all this. I have all the scientific links to that. And now we know that when they were killed off, then we started accumulating more residual because now only the ruminants were left behind. Even the wild horses in America were killed off and they were hindgut fermenters. So now they started seeing more less green chops coming up because the residual inhibits the regrowth, and the seedlings and the growth points, which are close to the ground, turn white and die. And then we get larger interplant spacings. And nature is always striving for higher and higher productivity per unit of land, and does that by complexity, and we know that, okay? And that's how soil improves. But the Native Americans started burning to lure in the migrating herds. Now only ruminants, now no hindgut fermenters. And they couldn't take it down to where burning was not needed. So that's what you are imagining 500, 1,000 years
Right.
ago.
Yep.
Burning. And before that, because of charcoal fossilized records, we know burning was not so widespread as after those large hindgut fermenters were killed off.
Because they would come in and consume all of the burnable material. They would come in and remove all
Exactly.
the residue.
Just like elephants do in the Okavango Delta. They are the last
Right.
ones to move into migration because they can still feed on lower quality grasses.
Yeah.
That's why zebras are the first to go on the migration after the rain start and grass is more mature in um, uh, in Kenya in the Serengeti. Then comes the wildebeest, And 20 some days later, to feed on the regrowth, comes the gazelle.
Fascinating.
Why they didn't see this? Why did they go to an experiment done in 1955 or 53 and not change in 80 years? That's my question. That's
Well,
what
the
I
not
am amazed and not very happy. I
well,
mean,
yeah, the not change in 80 years is the particularly problematic part of it. So it's in any other industry, in any other space, we know the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And in livestock raising, we've been doing the same thing for 80 years and getting bad results and not changing, not being flexible and open and adaptable to change.
and when they measure long-lived soil carbon, it doesn't increase, but they keep promoting it. We did an experiment. A friend of mine in the Iowa-Minnesota border. He took soil samples of his land and his neighbor who was set stocking, and after 10 years of rotational selective grazing, moving them up to 10 times a day, the cows, he took soil samples again with the neighbor, and they were both the same. It didn't go
Yep.
up 1.1% because when you graze selectivity in the green season, you do not create long-lived soil carbon. I did the same on my own farm where I had a grazed dairy for 28 years. And after the first few years that soil organic matter went up from 3 to 4%, it didn't improve after 28 years because we were always grazing grass in the vegetative stage, as you need to do with a grazed dairy. So it never increased. Then I stopped milking and switched to beef cows and started stockpiling the Total Grazing program. And now it improved like crazy in 3 years.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
All right. I have a question for you on managing the livestock in the field and a question for managing the forages, and they're kind of related. But um, I suppose I'll start with the livestock question. From your perspective, how do you manage the herd to have a non-selective grazing?
Okay. I covered that in my online courses. One is Total Grazing program. Another one is the Adaptive Genetics and Selection course. All these are online and come with coaching support, life coach. Another one is the optimal calving season, and another one is nutrition when grazing, because I'm a dairy nutritionist with 20 years experience. I have an accounting degree, and I am an agronomy engineer. So all this together means that to manage your grass better, you need management and genetics. And then you can do this at a lower cost. Of course, when we start, we may have unadapted genetics. So we start with the grazing management because that's the way to increase your grass production 3 times in the first year. So that makes a huge impact on profits. And then we start improving our selection of our livestock. So in 5 to 7 years, and starting on the first calf crop, we have better adapted genetics, especially in respect to nutritional adaptation, which is what allows some cows or ewes to be fat when others in the same herd or flock lose body condition.
Yep. All right. Earlier in the conversation, you
Oh,
mentioned
oh,
that.
wait. You say, how do I make
Yep.
them eat it all to one to
Yes.
2 inches? Because that's total grazing.
Yes.
Okay. So in the green season, our focus is on performance. So we want the highest quality forage paddocks, but first comes animal health. So enough fiber so they do not scour, but young enough so they perform the better. That's why we need to understand a little about nutrition when grazing. Okay, we do that, and we need to learn about the art of jumping paddocks. And then we do that with better adapted genetics, and we get the total graze, which is better than mowing because the saliva in the cows and ewes inoculate the growth points closer to the ground with growth promoting factors like hormones and vitamins. and then the regrowth is up to 80% faster than when cut with the machine.
What is the art of jumping paddocks?
Mm, that's a term made by André Bozan back in 1960, and it's when you go to your best quality paddocks in the green season to maintain the best animal performance possible. And that also improves your productivity. And I just
Yep.
created a master class on that. It's very interesting. When you
So,
combine that with the stockpiling, because you see, you stockpile mostly what your cattle or ewes cannot maintain at the highest quality.
yeah. So we've mentioned Andre Voisin's work twice now in our conversation. He has several books: Soil, Grass and Cancer, Grass
Mhm,
Productivity.
mhm.
Forget the other two titles. I think there's two more titles, but it's in many ways he is the godfather of this grazing um of grazing wisdom. I mean, we have Alan Savory and many of the pioneers names that I've mentioned previously.
Mhm.
But you go back and you read Andre Voisin's original work, and we've forgotten collectively a lot of the stuff that he knew.
Yeah, even in France, whenever I teach in France, I tell them, and nobody knows who he was. It's
Wow.
quite crazy. He should be a national hero, but nobody knows about him.
Yeah.
Or in New Zealand, when I tell them Grass to Milk by McKinnon, which I written in 1960 some, which was the basis of my making a profit on farming with livestock, where he said the main determinant of profits is stocking rate. And I got that, and I did all my calculations, and he was right. Well, when I went to New Zealand last month, they didn't know who he was.
Something about a prophet not being recognized in his own land.
The most important factor in profit, and they did not know what it was.
Wow. All right. Coming back to our conversation on grazing management and total grazing. Earlier in our discussion, you mentioned that there is a difference between recovery time and rest time and that they are not the same. What's the difference between the two?
Rest times are merely the days or months that are between grazings. Let's say you didn't graze a paddock for 6 months. I was in Georgia, near Russia, teaching a class a year and a half ago. And I say this, you need, whenever you stockpile for 6 months or more, you will get very high bulk and more improvement of your soil carbon. And a man was backstage and he came to me very angry at the end and said, through an interpreter, because I don't know Georgian, and he said, I'm very mad because what you said is not true. I did my pastures to stockpile for 6 months and nothing grows. And I said, how can that be possible? And then he explained, I live in a 7,000 feet high altitude place where we get snow for 6 months of the year. Then I take my sheep and goats down to the valley. And when we go back up, there is no stockpile. So that's the difference between recovery time and rest time. When there is no growth because of growing conditions, that's rest time. When there is growth because of good growing conditions, that's recovery.
That's an
It-
important distinction. That's a funny story. That's good.
it's funny. Yeah.
Yeah. But also going back to something you were describing earlier with your Bahia grass, I think we should not be measuring recovery time in terms of the time that has passed, days, weeks, months. We should be measuring recovery time in the stage of plant development.
Yeah, but that's you see, perennial grasses can go to seed, bolt to seed, very fast if you have short roots created by overgrazing. So that will be the stage, the reproductive stage, or they can delay and not go to seed because they had deep roots and high humus content in the soil and not being grazed, and then they will keep growing in leaf size. So it's not as simple as that. There is more. It's like soil carbon credits that they only measure a certain depth. It's not as easy as that. We should come up with a different way of measuring. We need to be pioneers in that. Yeah.
How should we thinking about recovery time? What is optimal recovery time?
Well, in the green season, you want the highest quality for your livestock. That means energy, digestibility, enough fiber to avoid scours, and enough protein to not create a protein overload. When you have too much protein to energy, you create health problems in your livestock. Okay. So, how can we measure that? I usually do it by observing the manure in the cow, the gut feel in the cow, their behavior, and I measure their daily gains by weighting them. And then you can learn a lot about grazing management. And when you have a grazed dairy, like I had for 28 years, you see the results next day in the bulk tank. So then you learn more. And when you're a dairy nutritionist with Free Choice Enterprises, which I had the franchise for Mexico for 20 years, you learn even more. And then when you travel and consult for people around the world, you learn a little more. Yeah. So what I have found is that you need to see at the color of the grass, there is a vibrant green that you get from amino acids and fatty acids fed plants, which is so different than the deep green of the synthetic nitrogen fed plants. And as you know, you do not get insect pests
Yeah.
because of that. Yeah.
You do not get insect pests, and one of the things I'm as a result of a conversation last summer, I started digging into endophyte toxicity in fescue, and yeah, I'd love to get your perspective on this because I'm persuaded that we can solve for endophyte toxicity completely with nutrition management. But I'd like to get your perspective on what you've observed.
Okay. What I have observed is that I have not tried to feed the plant better so it's less toxic in the toxic fescue belt. For example, in the UK, there is no problem with toxic fescue, but in Missouri, there is. Why? Uh, I think it has to do with higher summer temperatures in Missouri than in the UK, but also with genetics adaptation. Uh, I have used the Machona infused livestock to deal with that in East Virginia, and that solved the problem of the toxic fescue in summer. The toxic fescue problem is so high that people shift their calving season from the spring, which will be optimal, to the fall, which is the worst time of the year because of the toxic fescue and using unadapted genetics. So that's what I have learned. But if you can find a way to feed the plant better so that the toxic fescue will not be harming livestock, that will be a huge hit. Yeah.
Well, the research has already been done. The information is already in the literature on how to achieve it. But just as with Andre Voisan's work, everyone's ignoring it. It was
Mm,
already done back in the 60s. I just went looking for it and happened to find it.
wow. Have you heard that steel sharpens steel?
Yeah.
That's what we're doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Jim, this has been such an enjoyable conversation. Where can people find you? What other thoughts do you have that you want to share?
Okay, we already talked about how the soil long-lived carbon is built. Uh, I'm sure you can do it other ways. There is always more than one way to skin a cat. This is the way that I have found. And I have read you what you say about doing it with annual crops.
Mhm.
I believe that's possible. It's just that I haven't There is only one lifetime. I haven't had the time to go to that or the interest. I have dealt mostly with following nature, mostly. Uh, I'm sure it can be done also with annual crops, as you're doing. And I know that your foliars are working worldwide. I know they are. And but I have been trying to go follow nature in everything because we're called to be stewards of the land, and God created nature, and we need to understand it the best. So that's as far as I have gone. Uh, my website is ranching, rwranching.com, and I would like to offer for people a free downloadable guide for to improve their production, which is rwranching.com/pastures. That's it. And they can go there and get my podcasts and everything for free. Uh, what else can I say? We already talked about the megafauna. We already talked about fires. That's a very important topic because
Significant topic. Yeah.
in parts of the world, that's what's happening. More wildfires due to them not being here, those animals. And we can use our domesticated ruminants as a proxy for that with the correct grazing management. But we need to stop selective grazing. If we do not stop selective grazing, we will always fall into overgrazing, which shorten roots increase hardpan
Yeah.
and lowers grass productivity 3 to 5 times. And then we cannot increase long-lived soil carbon. That's what holds moisture. That's what feeds the plants the best. That's what determines your soil fertility.
And you'll never get to see happy plants.
Well, not in all environments. I told you, for example, in the mountains of Chihuahua, we got like a 90% reduction in seed heads. 90, but not 100% like we did in Florida.
But
Okay,
still,
still, but that's a byproduct that I didn't expect. But it's so interesting, and I need younger people to get on this because, well, we need younger people,
yeah.
everyone, because we're called to be stewards of the land, but our time is limited. So the more people and scientists that can get on this and determine, for example, what the fungi to bacteria ratio that when stockpiling compared to green grazing areas. That's so important. Or what's the fatty acid content in the root exudates? They're just finding out. That's you need to look at recent research to find that out. And that's what I'm doing. So I don't go back in 80 years ago to see what they were doing 80 years ago when electric fences were not in use. I go now to what's happening worldwide because we want to be the best in the world, not just the best in our little area.
Yeah. Jim, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for being here, for sharing your wisdom and experience. And I expect you'll get a lot of outreach as a result of this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and may God bless you all.
The team at AEA and I are dedicated to bringing this show to you because we believe that knowledge and information is the foundation of successful regenerative systems. At AEA, we believe that growing better quality food and making more money from your crops is possible. And since 2006, we've worked with leading professional growers to help them do just that. At AEA, we don't guess, we test, we analyze, and we provide recommendations based on scientific data, knowledge, and experience. We've developed products that are uniquely positioned to help growers make more money with regenerative agriculture. If you are a professional grower who believes in testing instead of guessing, someone who believes in a better, more regenerative way to grow, visit advancingecoag.com and contact us to see if AEA is right for you.